The deep woods were a place of shadows and secrets, a sprawling blanket of ancient trees that had stood for centuries, their gnarled branches weaving a ceiling that barely let the sunlight through. This was the Silvermane kingdom, a land of powerful werewolves, ruled by a long line of mighty kings. But in a forgotten corner of this vast territory, hidden so well that even the keenest wolf noses might miss it, stood a small, dilapidated cabin. It was here that our story truly begins, not with a roar or a howl, but with a soft, hesitant breath. Inside the cabin, in a room so small she could touch both walls if she stretched her arms wide, a young woman named Nyx sat on the edge of a narrow cot. The air was always still and carried the faint, unpleasant smell of old wood and dust. A single, small window, its glass grimy and cracked, offered a sliver of a view of the dense, forbidding forest. Nyx had lived in this room for as long as she could remember. Her entire world was these four walls, the worn-out rug on the floor, and the fleeting glimpses of the outside world through that dirty pane of glass. She didn't know why she was kept here, only that her stepmother, Morwenna, had always told her the world outside was too dangerous for a delicate girl like her. The rules were simple and they were absolute. Never leave the cabin, never open the door for anyone, and never, ever make a sound that could be heard outside. But some rules were too heavy for a heart to bear forever. As the last light of day faded, painting the sky in shades of deep purple and bruised blue, a familiar, crushing loneliness settled over Nyx. It was a feeling as constant as the coming of night, a cold weight in her chest. On this particular evening, the weight felt heavier than usual. The silence in the cabin was suffocating, broken only by the occasional creak of an old floorboard or the distant hoot of an owl. Morwenna was elsewhere in the cabin, and the usual sounds of her moving about had ceased, leaving a void that ached. Driven by a need for comfort that nothing else in her sparse room could provide, Nyx parted her lips and began to sing. It started as a whisper, a mere hum that vibrated in her throat. There were no words to her song. Words felt too limiting for the storm of emotions inside her. Instead, it was a melody, a flowing, gentle tune that spoke of longing for wide-open spaces, of dreams of running through fields under a full moon, of a desperate hope for a different kind of life. Her voice was a strange and beautiful instrument, clear as a mountain stream and warm as a summer breeze. It didn't just travel through the air, it seemed to change the air itself, filling her tiny room with a sense of peace and a magic she herself did not understand. It was the one thing Morwenna could not truly lock away, the one piece of her soul that remained free. Meanwhile, far from the hidden cabin, a massive wolf with fur the color of midnight and eyes that glowed like molten gold moved silently through the trees. This was Noctis the Alpha King. He was the strongest, the fastest, the leader of all the packs in the Silvermane kingdom. Yet, for all his strength and power, he carried a profound sadness within him. A king without a queen, a wolf without his mate. He had searched for years, decades, for his one true partner, the other half of his soul. Every moon cycle that passed without finding her felt like a failure. The weight of his crown was heavy, but the weight of his loneliness was crushing. Tonight, the burden was especially acute. The forest, usually a place of solace, felt just as empty as his own castle. He was alone, utterly and completely, a solitary king in a kingdom full of pairs. It was at this moment of his deepest despair that a thread of sound, delicate as a spider's silk, found its way to his supersensitive ears. He stopped, his large head tilting, every muscle in his powerful body going still. Was a song. A melody that wove through the pines and oaks, so pure and full of a hidden sorrow that it made his own heart clench in sympathy. He listened, and as he did, something incredible happened. The cold, hard knot of loneliness in his chest began to loosen. The song felt like a gentle hand on his fur, a soft light piercing the deep darkness of his spirit. It spoke to a part of him he thought had gone numb. Without a single conscious thought, driven by an instinct far deeper than duty or reason, the great wolf turned. His golden eyes narrowed, focusing on the direction from which the sound came. The hunt was over, not for an enemy or for prey, but for the source of this impossible comfort. He began to run, not with the fierce speed of a predator, but with a determined, steady pace, following the hauntingly beautiful song as it led him deeper into the heart of the woods, closer and closer to a hidden cabin and a lonely girl who had no idea her voice was about to change everything. The forest floor, a thick carpet of decaying leaves and soft moss, muffled the sound of the great wolf's paws. Noctis moved with a predator's innate silence, but his heart was thundering in his chest, a wild, hopeful drumbeat that echoed the rhythm of the song. Each step brought the melody clearer, each note a tiny hook pulling him forward. It was no longer a faint thread but a flowing river of sound, washing over him, seeping into the cracks of his weary soul. He slowed his pace as the trees began to thin slightly, his glowing golden eyes scanning the shadows until they found it, the source of the light in his darkness. It was a cabin, small and sad-looking, slumped amongst the trees as if ashamed of its own existence. The wood was weathered to a dull gray, and the roof sagged in the middle. But from its one grimy window, a soft, warm light flickered, and from that same window the song poured forth into the night. Noctis crept closer, his massive body low to the ground, blending perfectly with the deep shadows of the undergrowth. He found a spot where the bushes were thick, giving him a perfect, secret view of the window. And there she was, the girl. She was sitting on the edge of a simple cot, her hands folded in her lap, her face tilted slightly upward as she sang. She was beautiful, but not in a way he was used to seeing in his kingdom. Her beauty was fragile, like a flower that had bloomed without any sun. Her hair was the color of dark chocolate, and her eyes, even from this distance, looked large and full of a deep, soulful sadness that mirrored the tone of her song. She looked young and so very alone. Noctis felt a jolt, a recognition so profound and primal it stole the air from his lungs. This was her. The one his wolf had been howling for. His mate. The certainty of it was a physical force, a warm, solid weight settling in his core, replacing the cold emptiness he had carried for so long. But just as quickly as the warmth spread, a cold confusion followed. He reached out with his alpha senses, the part of him that could feel the presence of other wolves, the spark of their inner spirits. He searched for her wolf, for the fierce, wild counterpart that should be curled inside her, waiting to be awakened by her mate. He felt nothing. There was only a void, a human stillness where there should have been a vibrant, untamed energy. It was impossible. How could his destined mate, the other half of his wolf soul, have no wolf of her own? The contradiction made his head spin. He didn't understand the magic or the reason, but the pull, the undeniable magnetic attraction he felt toward her, was stronger than any logic. So he stayed. He simply lay down in the damp leaves, his head on his paws, and did the only thing that felt right. He listened. Inside her room, Nyx finished her song, the last note hanging in the air before fading into the familiar silence. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, a release of the emotion she had poured into her melody. She wiped it away quickly, a habit born from not wanting to show weakness, even when she was utterly alone. She stood and walked to the window, pressing her forehead against the cool, dirty glass, peering out into the impenetrable blackness of the forest. It was then that she saw them. 2 points of golden light, shining steadily from the deep shadows between the trees. A jolt of pure, cold fear shot through her. Her stepmother's warning screamed in her mind. Dangerous. Wild. Stay inside. Her first instinct was to jump back, to hide under her thin blanket. But she didn't. The eyes didn't move. They weren't the predatory, hungry eyes of a creature sizing up its meal. They were watching. They were calm, intelligent, and held a strange, deep sorrow that resonated with her own. She couldn't see the body they belonged to, just the faint, dark outline of something large. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird in a cage, but her fear began to slowly morph into a burning, dangerous curiosity. The next night, as darkness fell, Nyx found herself drawn to the window again. She hesitated for a long moment, her hand hovering near the dusty sill. Then, gathering her courage, she began to sing again, her voice a little softer, a little more questioning. She kept her eyes fixed on the spot where she had seen the golden eyes. And within minutes, they were there again, glowing softly from the same place. The wolf had returned. Night after night, this strange, silent ritual continued. Nyx would sing her loneliness into the night, and the wolf with the golden eyes would appear out of the darkness to listen. She started to look forward to it. The long, empty hours of the day now had a purpose, a secret anticipation. She was no longer just singing for herself, she was singing for him. She began to talk to him in the pauses between her songs, whispering secrets she had never told anyone. "I wish I knew what the stars looked like from a field," she would murmur. "I dream of feeling grass under my feet. My name is Nyx. What's yours?" Of course the wolf never answered. But sometimes he would shift his weight or let out a soft, quiet huff of air that sounded like understanding. A fragile, wordless trust was being built, thread by delicate thread. She started to see more of him on the nights when the moon was bright. He was enormous, a majestic creature of midnight black fur and powerful muscle, a king of the forest. Yet he never threatened her, never even came closer than the edge of the trees. He was her silent, steadfast guardian of the shadows. One evening, emboldened by weeks of this strange companionship, she did something reckless. As she finished her song, she slowly, carefully, raised her hand and pressed her palm flat against the cold glass of the window, a tiny, brave greeting from her prison to his freedom. In the darkness, the great wolf, Noctis, lifted his head. And then he did too. He took one slow, deliberate step forward, just out of the deepest shadows, and gave a single gentle dip of his massive head, his golden eyes never leaving hers. It was a promise. It was an acknowledgement. It was the beginning of everything. The fragile peace that Nyx had woven from moonlight and song shattered on a night thick with the promise of a storm. The air was heavy and still, the way it gets just before the sky breaks open. Inside her room, Nyx felt a strange restlessness, a prickling on her skin that had nothing to do with the charged atmosphere. Her nightly ritual with the wolf, whom she had secretly started to think of as her guardian, had become the anchor of her existence. Tonight, she sang with more strength than usual, her voice carrying a new, hopeful vibrancy. She was singing of a future, a hazy, beautiful dream where she wasn't behind glass, where she could run alongside her dark-furred friend under an open sky. Unbeknownst to her, this newfound strength in her voice was a beacon, a flare of power that her stepmother, Morwenna, could no longer ignore. Morwenna had been watching for weeks, her suspicion a slow-burning poison. She had felt the shift in the air around the cabin, a subtle magic that was not her own. She had seen the change in Nyx, the light in her eyes that had once been extinguished. And on this night, hidden in the deeper darkness on the opposite side of the clearing, she saw him. The great black wolf, his form unmistakably powerful, his posture that of a sovereign, listening with rapt attention to her prisoner's song. Rage, cold and sharp, pierced through her. Her carefully constructed prison was being compromised not by an escape, but by an invasion of hope. The cabin door flew open with a force that shook the very walls, the sound a gunshot in the quiet night. Nyx's song died in her throat, her hand flying to her mouth as she spun around. Morwenna stood in the doorway, her face a mask of twisted fury, her eyes blazing with a venomous light. "You foolish girl," she shrieked, her voice cutting through the air. "What have you done? You've led him right to us." Outside, Noctis erupted in a deep, thunderous growl, the sound vibrating through the forest floor. He surged forward from the trees, no longer a hidden observer but a visible, furious protector, his lips pulled back from his teeth in a savage snarl. Morwenna ignored him, her attention locked on Nyx, who was trembling, backing away until her shoulders hit the cold wall. "You want to know why you're here? You want to know why I've kept you safe?" She spat the word safe like it was a curse. "It was never for your protection. It was for mine." She took a step closer, her voice dropping to a venomous hiss. "You were born with a power you could never understand. A wolf spirit so pure, so strong, it would have made you a queen among these beasts. It would have made you his." She jerked her head toward the window, where Noctis was pacing, a caged storm of fury. "I couldn't have that, so I locked it away. I used a spell, a cage of dark magic around your heart, to keep your wolf asleep, to keep you weak, to keep you human and hidden. Your song was the only thing I couldn't stifle, and now it has betrayed us both." The truth landed on Nyx like a physical blow. It wasn't that she was fragile, she had been stolen from. Her loneliness, her feeling of being incomplete, it all had a name. It was her wolf, her other half, trapped and silenced. A profound grief and a righteous anger began to burn away her fear. Outside, Noctis understood everything. The missing piece of the puzzle snapped into place. The reason he couldn't sense her wolf wasn't because she didn't have one, but because it had been cruelly imprisoned. A roar of pure, unadulterated alpha fury tore from his throat, a sound so powerful it seemed to shake the very leaves from the trees. He would tear this woman apart. He lunged toward the cabin, but Morwenna was ready. She threw up her hands and a shimmering, sickly green wall of energy flared to life between her and the window, blocking his path. Noctis slammed against it, the magic sizzling against his fur, but he did not retreat. He focused, drawing upon the deep, ancient well of his own power, the inherited strength of 1,000 Alpha Kings. His body began to glow with a fierce, silver light, the color of the full moon. It was not a violent light, but a purifying one. He fixed his glowing golden eyes not on Morwenna, but on Nyx, on the center of her chest where he could now feel the faint, corrupted echo of the magical lock. He poured his will, his love, his very essence into that silver light, aiming it at the dark cage around her soul. The two magics collided with a sound like shattering crystal. Nyx cried out, not in pain but in shock, as a warmth exploded inside her, a heat so intense it felt like she was being reborn from the inside out. The green, sickly energy around her heart fractured, then dissolved into nothingness. And in that moment, the world exploded into a brilliance of sensation. She could hear the individual leaves rustling in the wind a mile away. She could smell the damp earth, the pine sap, the metallic tang of the coming storm, and the rich, wild scent of the wolf outside. Her body hummed with a strength she had never known, her senses stretching out, awakening to a world that was suddenly vibrantly alive. For the first time she felt a presence inside her own mind, not a cage but a companion, a fierce, loyal and joyful spirit that had been waiting in the dark. Her wolf was free. She was whole. The silence that fell after the magic shattered was profound, broken only by the first heavy drops of rain beginning to tap against the cabin roof. Morwenna, her power broken and her face a pale mask of stunned fury, seemed to shrink into the shadows of the cabin, momentarily forgotten by the two figures at the center of the storm. Nyx stood trembling, not from fear or cold, but from the overwhelming cascade of new sensations flooding her being. It was as if she had lived her entire life in a silent black and white room and had suddenly been thrust into a world of roaring color and symphony. She could hear the heartbeat of a mouse burrowing under the roots of a distant tree. She could distinguish the scent of wet bark from wet soil, and layered over it all, rich and comforting, was the distinct, wild aroma of pine and storm and power that was the black wolf. No, not just the wolf. Noctis. He had shifted. As the rain began to fall in earnest, the massive wolf was replaced by a man who stood tall and regal in the clearing. His clothes were simple, but his bearing was that of a king. His hair was as dark as his fur had been, and his eyes still held that same molten gold intensity, now fixed on her with a look of such awe and tender possessiveness that it made her breath catch. He took a step toward the window, and this time, there was no invisible wall to stop him. Nyx, moving on an instinct she didn't know she possessed, fumbled with the rusted latch of the window, pushing it open. The rain-cooled air washed over her face and she breathed it in, her first true breath of freedom. Noctis, she whispered, his name feeling both foreign and perfectly right on her tongue. His voice, when he spoke, was deep and gentle, a resonance that vibrated in her very soul. Nyx. He reached out, his hand hesitating just inches from her face, giving her the choice. She leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering closed as his warm, calloused palm cupped her cheek. The contact was electric. It was not just skin against skin, it was a completion. The lonely, silent parts of her soul sighed in relief, slotted perfectly into place beside his. The wolf inside her, now awake and vibrant, pressed against her mind with a feeling of pure, unadulterated joy. Mars. The following days were a whirlwind of discovery, a private, precious time where the outside world, including the vanished Morwenna, ceased to exist. Noctis never left her side. He guided her away from the wretched cabin and set up a temporary sheltered camp in a beautiful sun-dappled grove not far away. Here he began to teach her everything. He showed her how to listen to the forest with her new ears, how to identify the thousands of new scents that now carried stories on the wind. Her body, once frail from confinement, was now humming with a latent strength that surprised them both. She could run faster, jump higher, her movements becoming fluid and graceful. But the most profound lessons were the quiet ones. The moments spent sitting by a crackling fire as dusk settled around them. He told her of his kingdom, the Silvermane keep, of his years of lonely rule, and the hollow ache that had been his constant companion until the night her song had found him. She, in turn, shared the memories of her gray life in the cabin, the weight of the silence, the dreams she had whispered to the four walls. They shared stories and they shared silence, a comfortable, intimate quiet that was filled with the unspoken understanding flowing between them. Their hands would brush as they walked, sending sparks of warmth through her arm. He would tuck a stray strand of her hair behind her ear, his touch lingering just a moment longer than necessary. The air around them was constantly charged with a gentle, growing heat, a magnetic pull that drew them ever closer. One evening, as the last rays of the sun painted the sky in brilliant shades of orange and violet, they stood at the edge of the grove, looking out over the moonrise. Nyx was leaning back against Noctis's chest, his strong arms wrapped around her, his chin resting on the top of her head. She felt safe. She felt cherished. She felt loved. "It was your song," he murmured into her hair, his voice a soft rumble against her back. "In all my long life I had never heard anything so beautiful. It was a light in my darkness, Nyx. You called me home." She turned within the circle of his arms to face him, her eyes shining with unshed tears of happiness. She reached up, her fingers tracing the strong line of his jaw. "And you were my freedom," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. You heard me when no one else could. You came for me. He looked down at her, his golden eyes blazing with an intensity that stole her breath. The world narrowed to just the two of them, to the space between their lips. He dipped his head slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. But she rose onto her toes, meeting him halfway. Their first kiss was not a collision but a sealing. It was soft and searching at first, a tender exploration that spoke of promises and a future. Then it deepened, fueled by weeks of longing, of a connection that transcended the physical but was now joyfully celebrating it. It was warm and sweet and tasted of rain and hope and a love that had been written in the stars long before they were born. When they finally parted, breathless, foreheads resting together, the last of Nyx's old life fell away. She was no longer the prisoner in the cabin. She was Nyx, maid of Noctis, and her song was only just beginning. The journey to the Silvermane keep was a revelation for Nyx. Every step away from the dark, suffocating woods surrounding her old prison felt like a step into a brighter, more vibrant world. Noctis walked beside her, his presence a steady, reassuring anchor. He pointed out landmarks with names that sounded like poetry: the Whispering Falls, the Sunstone Ridge, the Valley of the First Howl. The further they traveled, the more the forest itself seemed to change, the trees standing taller, the air cleaner and filled with the lively sense of game and blooming flowers. It was a kingdom, a real, living, breathing kingdom, and with a dizzying sense of awe, Nyx began to understand that the man beside her, the one who held her hand with such gentle firmness, was its king. The thought should have been terrifying, but the bond that hummed between them, the warm, solid presence of her wolf within, made it feel like the most natural thing in the world. They crested a final hill and the keep itself came into view. It was not a cold, stone fortress as she had vaguely imagined, but a breathtaking structure woven into the very landscape. Grand towers of pale, silvery stone rose towards the sky, but they were entwined with living trees and cascading vines heavy with glowing, moon-pale flowers. It was both powerful and beautiful, a testament to a people who lived in harmony with the wild. As they approached the great gates, which were carved with the history of the wolves, people began to emerge. Dozens, then hundreds of them, their faces alight with curiosity and hope. They bowed their heads respectfully to Noctis, but their eyes were drawn to Nyx, their gazes lingering on the way their king never let go of her hand, on the new, confident light in her own eyes. Noctis led her to the center of the main courtyard, a vast, open space paved with smooth river stones under the soft light of the rising moon. He turned to face his people, his voice projecting easily, filled with a joy they had never heard from him before. "People of Silvermane," he announced, his hand tightening around Nyx's. "For years I have ruled alone. I have searched for the one who would complete not just my soul, but the heart of our kingdom. The moon goddess has answered our prayers. This is Nyx, my fated mate, your queen." A ripple of excitement went through the crowd, followed by a wave of joyful howls that rose into the night sky, a chorus of welcome that made the very air vibrate. Nyx felt a blush warm her cheeks, but she stood tall, a small, genuine smile touching her lips as she looked out at the sea of happy faces. But then, a flicker of movement at the edge of the crowd caught her eye. A familiar, hateful figure stood there, half hidden in the shadow of an archway. Morwenna. Her face was a thundercloud of bitterness and spite. She had followed them, drawn by her hatred, to witness the triumph she had tried so hard to prevent. Nyx's smile faded. She felt a low growl rumble in Noctis's chest, and she felt her own wolf rise to the surface, not with fear, but with a fierce, protective instinct. This was her home now. These were her people. She would not let the shadow of her past darken this moment. As Morwenna took a step forward, a malicious gleam in her eye, Nyx acted. She gently squeezed Noctis's hand, a silent signal that this was her battle to fight. She stepped forward, meeting her stepmother's gaze squarely. The crowd fell silent, sensing the shift in the air. "You have no power here, Morwenna," Nyx said, her voice clear and steady, carrying a new, unshakable authority she had found in her freedom. "You tried to lock me away. You tried to steal my voice, my spirit, my future. But you failed." She felt Noctis's unwavering support behind her, a pillar of strength. She felt the collective will of the pack around her. "The darkness you tried to trap me in is gone. And I will not let you bring it here." She didn't need to shout. She didn't need magic. The simple, powerful truth of her words, backed by the queen she had become, was enough. Morwenna's face crumpled. The hatred in her eyes was extinguished, replaced by a hollow, defeated realization that her schemes were truly, finally over. She shrank back into the shadows and was gone, this time for good. A profound peace settled over the courtyard. Noctis came to stand beside Nyx again, his pride in her shining in his eyes. He turned to his people. "Let the celebration begin," he declared. Music started up, lively and joyful, and the courtyard erupted into laughter and dancing. But all eyes eventually drifted back to their new king and queen. Noctis led Nyx to a small raised dais. He looked at her, his expression full of so much love it made her heart ache. "My queen," he said softly, for her ears only, "the kingdom has heard my command. But will they now hear your song?" Nyx took a deep, steadying breath. The nerves were there, fluttering in her stomach, but they were overshadowed by a profound sense of belonging, of rightness. She looked out at the expectant, happy faces, at the man who was her destiny, and she began to sing. This song was different from all the others. It was not a song of loneliness or longing. It was a song of homecoming. Her voice, still as clear and magical as ever, now carried the full strength of her spirit, the joy of her wolf and the deep, abiding love for her mate and her new people. It wove through the celebration, a golden thread of harmony that touched every heart, a promise of a new, joyful era for the Silvermane kingdom. As the last, beautiful note faded, the crowd did not just cheer. They bowed, a gesture of deep respect and love for the queen who was found by a song. Noctis pulled her into his arms, and under the blanket of 1,000 twinkling stars, they knew their life together was just beginning, a forever of love and rule, side by side. And so, the tale of the lonely singer and the lonely king finds its happy ending, a reminder that even in the darkest of places, a song of hope can light the way to a beautiful future. If you've been swept away by the journey of Noctis and Nyx, if you felt your heart soar with their triumphs and ache with their struggles, then you know the magic of a story that captures the soul. There are countless other tales waiting to be told, other worlds of romance, adventure, and destiny just waiting to be discovered. To ensure you never miss the next captivating story, to join a community of fellow dreamers who find solace and excitement in these narratives, we invite you to become a part of our channel. By subscribing, you unlock a treasure trove of adventures and make sure you're always the first to experience the next unforgettable journey. Your next favorite story is just a click away.